Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. Time for another episode of our Introducing series. This time we're going to talk about William Osuula. It's a pleasure to welcome Hal Stewart of Sheffield United back to the podcast. How are we doing, Hal?
Well, I'd rather be talking to you about the fact that, we just signed Alexander Isak. That would be great. But we're not. We're talking about a player who's left my club, and I'll try and give a fair representation and give you all the gen ahead of seeing William Osuula play in black and white.
Well, I'm hoping you're going to tell us that William Osuula is the next Alexander Isak. Newcastle United have splashed out around £15 million for the services of the striker. 21 years of age, has not scored a goal in the Premier League. In fact, it's only scored 3 goals for Sheffield United. So some might look at this as a bit of a gamble. How would you judge the signing?
Oh, it is a gamble. 15 million is the same that Newcastle paid for Alan Shearer. And this is, of course, a different time, and inflation and everything, of course, will have changed that. When he did score those goals, admittedly in the FA Cup against lower league opposition, they were very tidy finishes. He's very composed. And I watched quite a bit of him in the youth teams where he looked like an absolute man mountain. And he looked strong, confident, bullish. And he could take the ball on, drive forward, and then put that composed right foot finish into the bottom corner. That's the sort of player that we saw, and that's when I started saying, Osuula, he is so cooler, which I didn't want to catch on as a chant. I just wanted to say it because it wound a lot of people up, and so I carried it on. He is a good striker, but what he needs is confidence. He's gonna be that kind of player that needs an arm around the shoulder rather than, Eddie Howe to give him an absolute rollicking at half-time if it's ever not going his way.
Yeah, plenty of things to learn for the young man, but we saw him for the first time on Saturday in a pre-season friendly against Brest up at St James's Park, and he had the ball in the back of the net, was ruled out for offside. I do think if VAR was in operation, it probably would have counted because it was very, very tight, but it was a run from just over the halfway line, lovely ball at the top from Harvey Barnes, and it was a fantastic touch to bring it down, and he just opens up his body and side foots it past the goalkeeper. And I think a lot of people in that moment, and again, pre-season friendly, his first bit of action, but you kind of went, yeah, okay, maybe this kid's got something about him, because there has been a bit of skepticism. As you said, it is a gamble, but I think a lot of people are hoping there's more of that to come. How will he handle being effectively, for now, Newcastle United's second choice striker? People are saying in an ideal world he'd be third choice to Callum Wilson and Alexander Isak. He bedded in. He might play a few games for the youth side. Might even get a loan, was what some people were suggesting, which is a crazy idea. But as things stand, with Callum Wilson out injured, he'll be on the bench, Will Osuula, on Saturday against Southampton. And, if things aren't working well for Alexander Isak, he might have to come on and win the game for Newcastle. So do you think he'll handle that pressure all right?
Well, you just mentioned Brest. He'll need support. And you'd want big things up top. He will be the kind of player that, he'll drift out wide, often drifts out to the left, so don't be surprised to see that. He's usually had players around him. He's usually played in a 2 when he's played for Sheffield United. As a lone striker, very rare. And in fact, in a pre-season for us this season, he was only playing out as a winger. And he looked very good. He looked better on the wing than he did as an out-and-out striker. But in his career, he's predominantly been a striker. Majority of games, he's played there only a few times on the wing. But he hasn't played that many senior games for too many teams. He went on a loan spell at Derby County, did all right there. As you mentioned, he's never actually scored a league goal for the Red and White Wizards. It was only in the Cup where he did actually bag for us. And I had seen him miss chances in the top flight. He started against Crystal Palace on the opening day last season for Sheffield United, and we weren't really expecting him. We were thinking he was probably third in the pecking order. And you've just mentioned there he might be boosted up the pecking order because of injuries. Well, that's what we had. And we'd also sold players. So he had to play earlier than he would have expected. And that maybe didn't do his confidence much good, because I always feel like if he'd bagged early on for Sheffield United, early on in his career in the league, he might have just kicked on, and who knows, we'd be talking about a player that's worth even more than what I still think is quite a large fee for a player who was in the last year of his contract. I think Newcastle are taking quite a gamble. And then there's the other side of me that thinks, well, is he the next Dominic Calvert-Lewin, which we let go for the criminally low fee? We've just lost Daniel Jebbison to Bournemouth for a very low fee because that went to, I think just before actually it went to a tribunal. We just agreed a fee because his contract had run out. But like Osuula, another one from our very, very successful youth setup. Ideally this season, he'd have stayed, for me anyway, ideally, he'd have stayed at Sheffield United and he probably would have been our first choice left winger. Now you're telling me he's going to be second choice Newcastle central striker. A month ago, I don't think anyone would have seen that except maybe the scouts at Newcastle United. So this is going to be really interesting to see how he handles the pressure of the cauldron-like atmosphere at St James's, the crowd, which will be something he hasn't really experienced because Bramall Lane just simply isn't as big as St James's. It's a loud stadium and that we really get behind our team just the same as you guys do. But it's less people, naturally. But he has played in these big stadia and he did last season, but he didn't score. So it's very hard to know. I do think, though, like I've mentioned, he's a confidence player. I do think if he gets one, it's going to go one of either two ways. He gets one, his confidence builds, he might go on a little run. What you might more likely see is he might get one and then he might not actually keep his place. You know, Wilson comes back, Alexander Isak's back or whatever. And I would have thought that Eddie Howe, even if Osuola's played a really good game just prior or as a sub, he's probably going to stick with the tried and tested.
Yeah, most possibly. It's interesting you mentioned that he can play out on the wing. I think that's another reason Newcastle United actually went out and got him, because he can play out on both flanks, predominantly over on the left. But it's even more interesting that you say you think he would have been first choice out on the flank for Sheff United this season. I think that will really have people asking a few questions from a Newcastle United point of view.
Yeah, it's forced us, of course, to change and go out and have to sign players as well for far less. This has ended up financially looking like a really good deal for the Blades because we've sold one player and we've ended up being able to bring in lots of players. So we've now got many options on a new formation that we're trying. So we'll see when we are playing you again next season, and I'm saying that because we're going up, obviously not Newcastle going down, you won't see, I don't think, the same kind of Sheffield United performance, certainly that you saw at Bramall Lane last season. Let's never speak of that again. But I do think you'll see a much more compact, a tighter, a team that's going to press, and a team that will be able to actually successfully hit bigger sides on the break, because we did hardly have any of the ball. You know, at St James's, you might recall, first half, the Blades played really well against Newcastle last season, but we just couldn't take our chances. And the idea this time now, we're playing four at the back and playing like one up, but with two strikers who are wingers, who are going to play on the opposite flanks to their preferred foot, cutting in. That should open up opportunities, hopefully. It certainly looked that way early doors for the Blades. We had a very good pre-season, and we started the season with a win, and that's with a brand new formation. And Chris Wilder has been wedded to three at the back with overlapping centre-backs, which he created. And that's, the overlapping centre-backs sort of gone for a while. But the three at the back has been a kind of Chris Wilder staple. And he brought in four when he came back last season and then went back to three. Now it looks like we're going four, and Osuula would have been a key part of this formation, I'm pretty certain, playing out on the left. You've got that option in there. You've got that option either from the start or in-game. But even if he starts centrally, don't be surprised if there's no one out there on that left to see him drift out there, even though he is right-footed.
Very much like Alexander Isak, who loves just kind of moving out to either flank, really, when Newcastle United or when he hasn't got the ball. We saw on Saturday against Preston, it was probably a really good time for him to get his first introduction of St James's Park. You know, he started the game, fair crowd, I think probably about over 30,000, if not a little bit more, loud. Of course, nothing like a Premier League game, but still he's got a little taste for it. So when he does get his first introduction of competitive football, it won't come as a shock to him. But we saw on Saturday a few times him moving out to the flanks and creating space for the runners who were coming off the wings, which is fantastic. And like I say, in the shadow of Alexander Isak. I mean, when you hear me say that, Hal, can you see why I'm saying it? Can you see the comparison between Alexander Isak and Osuula?
Yeah, but though it's strange for me to hear that in some senses, because I picture Isak, and I might have him wrong because I haven't watched him as many times as you, as quite a skillful will-o'-the-wisp slight player. And the Will Osuula that I saw more in the youth setup, certainly than the first team, was the biggest lad and usually used his strength to get forward. I don't think that's exactly like Alexander Isak. He's got wheels for feet and he's got tricky feet. I haven't seen as much of that from Osuula. But then again, we haven't as Sheffield United fans. I don't think we've not got a big enough sample size. In the Championship, we play 46 games. And with Osuula, he's in the Championship was never first choice. We saw him play 21 times in the Premier League and not all of those starting last season. He's never been a first choice in the Championship. I think he played something like 7 games in the Championship. So we needed to see more, and we got glimpses. Every pre-season he looked really good, really hungry, and like this is finally his season to kick on. And of course it never actually happened. So when you're only seeing glimpses of what is essentially potential, and that's what Newcastle have taken a gamble on, as a Blade, when he's playing for Sheff United, you hope he reaches that potential. But now he's left us. There's 2 different ways that we look at it. 1, you want him to succeed because he seems like a really nice lad. 2, you want him to succeed because of all the add-ons that we'll no doubt have in the deal, and we want him to get that extra because it's 10 million plus 5 with the add-ons. We want him to reach all those add-ons so we get more money. But then the other side is, look, we've done this a lot of times. We've sold young, promising talent before we got to reap the benefits. Harry Maguire was probably one where we saw quite a lot of him and then we let him go. But Kyle Walker, we let him go way too soon. David Brooks, it was a shame to let him go when we did. I've mentioned Dominic Calvert-Lewin already. We said goodbye to Aaron Ramsdale as well. Decent players. We had Gary Cahill, the centre-back on loan when he was a youngster. And God, well, what we'd have given to sign him. And then we couldn't make that deal happen. And then you watch these players go on and just continue to achieve. And it might be quite painful for us to see Will Osuula become like Alexander Isak. We'd be like, well, we'd have loved a full season of that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that he does become like Alexander Isak and you can get those add-ons. Have you seen it enough? And I know you're saying you've only seen glimpses, but have you seen enough in him to kind of understand why Newcastle United has spent so much money on him?
When you've watched him for Denmark in the youth setup, he's looked like a natural finisher. But in the Premier League for Sheffield United, he never looked like a natural finisher. But then again, I have to temper that with we did not create a lot. He saw very little of the ball. It's not like he was missing lots of chances for the Blades in the Premier League. We weren't creating much for him, but there were a few opportunities where I thought, yeah, he probably could have done a little bit better there. There's sort of glimpses, but he's never put it all together for us. So I really don't know. I'm very much on I'm going to be interested to see how this plays out kind of fence. And obviously for him, he seems like a really nice guy. I've watched quite a few interviews with him. I know from following on social media, he's deeply religious. And that might help him. That might be what he needs, to get him through the times when he might have a couple of bad games or 3 in a row. And who knows? Every individual is completely different. I've said I think he's a confidence player. That is a guess. But from what I've heard him say and imagined, I think I'm imagining it correctly. And I do believe if he gets a goal and then kicks on, we'll be looking at it going, knew it. What a player, we let him go. And the other side of it means he might have a slow start, maybe misses a couple of chances with a big crowd behind him. That might be difficult. He might then need a loan spell. And I think looking at him in pre-season, I think Championship is his level. And maybe a loan in the Championship, that would annoy me if he went to our rivals. And if you get enough players in or back and you've got more striker options, a loan might be what he needs to build his confidence up this season. And then next season, you've got the real Will Osuula. Who knows?
I can't see him going out on loan. I think, given Newcastle United's issues with the budget, I can't see them bringing in another striker. I think Eddie Howe will be dependent on Callum Wilson coming back and being fit, Alexander Isak remaining injury-free, and then William Osuula being involved within the 3 and hopefully, pushing both Wilson and Isak for that starting place. He does seem like a very down-to-earth kind of guy with the interviews that I've watched, and very modest. He will be under no illusion, though, of the crossroads that he's kind of at, because this is a big move. Newcastle United have ambitions to be one of the very best clubs in Europe. Champions League last season, unfortunately not Champions League this season, but the aim is top 4 again, hopefully this season to come. He will be aware that he has to work hard, get his head down, but also produce the goals, and he has to get the ball in the back of the net, because if not, this brilliant opportunity that presents itself will soon be over. And I don't know how long the contract is, 4 or 5 years, but he won't be around that long if he doesn't manage to find his goal scoring feet in the Premier League.
Yeah, it's unlikely he'll get that kind of money for him if he doesn't produce goals. And like I say, we really don't know, because he hasn't produced that many goals in his career. It is still a very early career. It's a burgeoning career. And this is with Newcastle's financial issues, which is mad, isn't it, to sort of say. But with the rules now in the Premier League, it's not like the old days where if you had a lot of money, you had a lot of money and you could go out and buy whoever you wanted. It's changed. So actually, it could be very, very shrewd scouting. You've had to look at a different way of doing it and a different model. And Newcastle have taken a risk on a young lad who could be brilliant. And I think we're all going to say the same thing. He could be brilliant, or it might not happen for him. That doesn't mean he isn't a brilliant player. Sometimes a different environment, it just clicks for a certain player. And I hope for Will that is at St James's. But if it isn't, we might be looking at, in 10 years' time, might look back at Will Osuola's career and go, do you know what? It was amazing. All he needed was that move to Villa, and it all suddenly came together, And it might be that's the sort of thing that happens to him, because some players, it just works at certain environments. We've all seen that, with certainly with strikers, different strikers. But it's interesting, he will get more minutes than he probably imagined when he first signed, just given what you've got going on up top.
Yeah, I definitely think he will do. I think just because, as good as Alexander Isak is, he's not going to be on form every single game. So Eddie Howe will have to turn to his bench, and he will be William Osuula if he's fit and raring to go, which we think he is. I know he had a bit of an issue with a concussion, but he played on Saturday. He looked like a man who hadn't had maybe the best of pre-seasons in terms of fitness, but he looked like he was ready to play his part this Saturday against Southampton. So he'll be on the bench, and if he's called upon, he'll have to probably socks up and get onto the pitch. I am really excited. I'm hoping this one really does prove to be worth every single penny. I just think it would be a lovely story. The guy who's come out of nowhere, no one expected him to sign for Newcastle, and fingers crossed he can make it at St James's Park. When you heard the price tag, when you heard it was 10 to 15 million pounds, what was your reaction?
My reaction was, right, Sheff United can go and get all the players we need. We've been in an absolute dire financial situation and not being able to bring in the bodies that we've needed. As soon as I heard that fee, I think I would have thought the same as Chris Wilder obviously did. Got to accept that. Just got to accept that, because he is only potential. And, at Sheff United, he might have worked out, he might not. I might never get an offer like that again. Apparently, I don't know how true it is, but we turned down a big money offer many years ago for Daniel Jebison. We ended up losing him. His contract ran out, and we only get a minimal fee when he goes to Bournemouth. You can't allow that to happen again. I've already mentioned Dominic Calvert-Lewin, sold him for dirt cheap because it was just potential at that point, and Dominic Calvert-Lewin hadn't done it in a Blade shirt. So maybe this time they went, we can't have that. Let's if we get a great offer, it's above a certain amount, even though we like the lad, even though we see him being a first teamer for us, we have to accept this.
Yeah, so was it a bit like Newcastle and Elliot Anderson, where they cashed in because they kind of had to? It was a good deal. I mean, I know the scenarios are a little bit different, but in an ideal world, they wouldn't have wanted to have cashed in. Just the offer was there, and they kind of had to.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's different, I suppose, in some senses, because you have to have a certain amount of homegrown players when you're in Europe. We don't have that issue. So I think Newcastle would obviously rather have kept a player like that to help with that particular quota, because it's one quota's one problem, another quota's another problem. So, but yeah, that's similar in some senses. He's Danish, of course. Will Osuula, even though he would count as a youth and a homegrown player for us, we got him from FC Copenhagen quite a long time ago. Again, wonderful scouting. Sheff United have done that so well, and we have to do that because we simply don't have the money. So we have to do that clever scouting. Some work, some don't. But I think a lot of the time we do that with an eye on a financial asset in the future, because we've always been a selling club.
And just to go back to the whole first choice out on the left, so who's keeping him, or who would have kept him out of the Sheffield United starting 11 up front?
Up front this season now, Kiefer Moore would probably have been the striker option. We've got Rhian Brewster. I mean, that's an expensive one that, again, we were buying potential, and that hasn't worked. Rhian would be the first to admit that. Of course, at the time, Ollie McBurney was still being muted as a player we'd get back if he'd re-signed. And you know what? I don't know what would have happened if we'd kept Will Osuula, if McBurney would still be here. Because now we've got the money for Osuula. We were able to go out and get so many other players. And even as we're speaking now, there's talk about we're going to finally get our long-term goalkeeping solution in Michael Cooper from Plymouth. We're going to be able to sign it even just on loan, Jezza and Raksaki, an enormous loan fee that we're going to have to pay, but we wouldn't have been able to afford that before. We got Harrison Burrows from Peterborough, who can probably play on the left wing. We've got so many more options now, and it's because we were able to make that sale, even though if we'd had all the money in the world, we would not have sold Will Osuula.
And yeah, you can see this by the quotes from Chris Wilder, who was asked whether it was a good one for the club, i.e. selling Osuula, and he said, "I believe so. It's a great move for Will, working with fantastic operators in Eddie Howe and Jason Tyndall in a great club. I've talked about it in length, how difficult it is when a Premier League club comes for a player, but the club feels it's got a good price for a promising player." And I guess it would be slightly different if he'd shown a bit more than potential. If he'd scored, if he'd scored 10 goals last season, then he definitely would have been moved on. But my point being that, Chris Wilder maybe would have felt a little bit more that he'd lost a bit more of a key player to his team. It's quite interesting, isn't it, that Jason Tyndall seems to have played a big role in this, that he reportedly had spotted him many, many years ago. And he's had a little word with Eddie about Osuola's potential.
Yeah, Jason Tyndall was at Sheffield United. So when he was working with our coaching staff, of course, he'd have seen William Osuula up close, and they would have known all about him. And that's probably absolutely a major reason. And maybe watching him in training, which I haven't had the privilege of doing. Jason Tyndall, I always want to call him JT Hammer because that's what we called him when he was with us. I would always have thought that if you see him in training, you kind of get a better idea. And perhaps in training, Will Osuula is absolute dynamite. Perhaps one-on-one in goal, he was the most lethal finisher at the Lane. I don't know. I haven't had that opportunity to see that. But Jason Tyndall did see that, and obviously has reported that to Eddie Howe. And there you go. That's probably all it took. And Eddie, his confidant says this. That's the reason he's kept him close all these years. And also to take the spotlight off Eddie, because, Jason Tyndall's always front and centre. He will have to listen to him. Otherwise, what's the point of having him there?
Exactly. He trusts his judgment, and hopefully Jason Tyndall's not wrong on this one. Talk to me then just about Osuola's main attributes. If there's one thing that you would tell Newcastle United fans about when it comes to his style of play or something he does on the pitch, what would it be?
Oh, it's such a difficult one because, as I say, in the youth setup, he looked so different to when he was playing in the first team. So in the youth setup, I'd have said it was his strength, his belief and his determination. If there was a ball there to be won in between two centre-backs, I always felt like Osuula was going to get there, out-muscle him and get his shot away. He always looked so confident in the youth setup. In the first team, he didn't quite look like that. I suppose some of the things that bothered me about him in the first team were just his inability to hold up the ball. There was a few times when we saw that and it just didn't quite stick. So I would say that he's not that player. He'd maybe need someone else to assist him with that. And that was probably the long-term plan. And maybe that's why he worked out better on the wing, because he's that live wire and he's got a little bit of pace about him, and he'll play on the shoulder and he can get going. And I like to see him drive forward. And I do believe Will Osuula, one-on-one with a keeper, a confident Will Osuula. He has actually got a nice right foot finish on him. I would say his left foot isn't, always his strongest, and so if he does play on the left, it won't take defenders too long to figure out. You just put him on his weaker foot. But then again, maybe he's been working on it. Again, I haven't seen him in training.
Well, if that goal that got ruled out was anything to go by, it was a lovely finish, really nice bit of play from him, and hopefully we see more of that. If there's a weakness you would point Eddie Howe in the direction of, and you would like to tell Eddie that this is what you have to work on when it comes to Osuula, what would it be?
Well, I've already mentioned his left, so I need to see more of his left foot. I don't know if it's a true weakness. I just didn't see enough of it. I do think, as I say, sometimes he just lost the ball a little bit easily, and I think he's got more in him than we saw. I mean, if you watch the highlights, any Newcastle fan, go back and watch first game of last season, the Blades at home against Palace. There's in that game, I think you just see the Will Osuula that we saw in the first team. There's moments when he looked really good and he looked like our best striker on that day, and then there's moments when you're like, oh, Will, can you just keep the ball? We've got to hold on to the ball for longer than this because we're losing so much possession. And really, in that match, I think he had one decent chance, but again, it's because he got so few opportunities to be created for him that I feel like I haven't seen enough of a sample size to give a real confident answer. I feel like there's almost every other player in the entire squad. I could give you a rundown of attributes and be very, very confident I've got them spot on. With Osuula, there were so many games when he looked different to how he looked in other matches. I would just love to have seen him a proper run. I felt like this was going to be the season, a 46-game season, playing out from the left. I think by the end of this season, every Blade would have known exactly what Will Osuula is about, and we didn't get enough of that. But from that left in pre-season this season, he looked direct, he looked powerful, he looked pacey, he looked confident, and I felt like, get that goal, he'll go on and get two.
Yeah. In terms of that concussion that he suffered, how much did that knock his pre-season?
Oh yeah, that was a nasty one, wasn't it? Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, at the time we were thinking he's out with concussion, and then there was other rumours going, well, he is out with concussion, but also he wouldn't have played in this next friendly anyway because he's going to Newcastle. So, we were thinking, okay, what's the deal? Are we going to ever see Will Osuula play for us again? So it was hard to know, how bad the concussion was because we didn't see him again after that.
Well, fingers crossed he's recovered from it. We're hoping from a Newcastle point of view this season that we see that high press, that high energy game that we saw a couple of seasons back that helped Newcastle get to the Champions League. It was missing sort of last season due to the injuries, due to the schedule. The fitness wasn't really at the level that we've come to know it under Eddie Howe. It looks like it is back, and it's only pre-season, so we have to kind of, calm down a little bit. But how will William Osuula fit into that style of play? Because you would suspect that if he comes on for Alexander Isak, it's a like-for-like change. He started up front in that pre-season friendly. He seemed to handle it, all right. Do you think he will be able to master the high press?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. I mean, he didn't get a chance with the Blades. With Derby County, when he was on loan there, I know Derby fans that I spoke to just after his loan spell said he was petulant, which is something we hadn't seen. And I don't know. That doesn't sound like the Will Osuula at all that we'd got to know. And I think they got fed up with him because he did miss games. I think he got red cards. I think maybe that was the issue. I didn't watch any of his time at Derby. But I imagine with Derby, they'd have been a side looking for promotion when he was playing in League One. And they would probably have been the team that had a lot more of the ball. When he was playing for the Blades last season, we were a team that had, in some occasions, in the tens of % of the ball. So actually it'd be really interesting to see how he plays for a side that's got more of the ball and that will be playing further up the pitch and not camped out as we sometimes were in our own half. I think it'll actually benefit him. And like I said, when we were in our youth system, and I saw him a few times for the youth, our youth system's always done well, even though we're not a Category 1. Our academy's good, and the teams would often, the young teams he was playing, be the ones that would win the games. He was playing in a good youth side, so he would see a lot more of the ball. And he always, even if you just saw the score, you'd see Osuula assist or Osuula goal, and you think, okay, this guy, you remembered the name because he was just doing well in the youth setup, and that is probably a better marker and a better barometer of when he's playing in a side that's got the ball a lot. Okay, he can do things. When he's playing with a side that are going to give him one chance every 3 games, and he's a bit low on confidence, and he's playing against the big boys for the first time in his life. How much can he do, and how much can we really read into that?
So he needs that service, hopefully with the likes of Anthony Gordon, Harvey Barnes, Jacob Murphy. He will get that service and score a few goals for Newcastle United. Just to finish off the episode then, Hal, just describe to us what Newcastle United have got in William Osuula and what you think the future holds from at Newcastle United.
You've got a prospect. You've got a prospect that could go on to be really exciting. If he puts it all together, that power, that pace, that great first touch he's sometimes shown, that cool, composed finish, again, that in the youth setup that he showed. If you get that and you bottle it and he believes in himself, I do believe you've got a very, very special talent there. And then, because I keep mentioning it is just potential at this stage, and I really hope it doesn't go the other way, but I do think, and I do worry, that if the Will Osuula that Derby County fans told us about when he'd had a loan spell there, they weren't too sad that it ended. And that was a concern for us. We'd sent him to Derby thinking, this is all he needs. Loan spell at Derby, comes back to United, kicks on, and it didn't happen. And I don't know why. And again, that might have been the system, might have been confidence. Maybe it just came a little too early. He is still young. Back him, give him time, don't get on his back, support him. Could have a great prospect there.
Fingers crossed that great prospect does indeed become a goal-scoring machine for Newcastle United. Hal, it's been a pleasure to have you back on the podcast. I'll keep the seat warm for your next appearance next season when hopefully Sheff United are back in the Premier League. Thank you, as always, for sparing the time. To you guys watching and listening, hit subscribe, give the video a thumbs up on YouTube. If you're on the audio channel, leave us a rating and review. It's been a pleasure, as always. For myself, I'll see you guys very soon.